I'm going to repeat myself, folks. So this is a part of a speaker series that's funded by the Faculty of Social Sciences at Western University to support dialogue on disability issues between researchers in Brazil and Canada. This is our third organized talk in this series where we match a Brazilian researcher and a Canadian researcher on a particular theme. Today, obviously, the theme is employment and autistic people and employment. We provide the recording in with captions in Portuguese and English. So if people can't unfortunately, we cannot provide English captions for this because we just don't have the option. We do have simultaneous translation, but we do not have the option of both English and Portuguese captions, but the recording will have captions in both languages. So I apologize, we weren't able to do both live. So I'm going to hand it over to Rob Austin, our first speaker. He is, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Rob, to be super, yeah. Sorry.
No problem. No problem at all.
Move things along because I'm losing my words.
Yeah, so it's fabulous to be here, and thank you, Pamela, for setting all this up. And I really look forward to our conversation today. This is an area that I've been interested in for a while and done research in. I have a research group at the Ivy Business School that studies this, and I see at least one member of our research team is here. Fatemeh Bakshi is here from, she would be calling in from Iran. So good geography distribution here to the east as well. So yeah, I'm going to share some slides and then I'm just going to talk through them pretty quickly. I have been studying what I tend to call neurodiversity employment for a while now. I became interested in it in a almost accidental way. I historically am a researcher in areas like information technology and innovation. They're not unrelated. A lot of the activity the pioneering activity in neurodiversity employment has been in the tech sector. So that's, there is some logic to my stumbling into it, but I'm not historically a clinician or anything like that. I began to be involved in this in about 2006 when I met a gentleman by the name of Torkel Sona. Torkel, many of you may know, is the founder of Specialisterna. It's a Danish company that was created in 2004, and it was really the first company that developed a lot of the new approaches that a lot of other companies have adopted since for what I would call it debiasing hiring processes to in a way that allowed people who had very distinct talents but had disadvantages in traditional hiring processes to be hired. Specialisterna means the specialists. Torkel created the company because his son Lars was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, and he wanted to create opportunities for people like his son. And so in 2006, I met him. I was a professor at Harvard Business School at the time, but I was visiting Denmark. So we wrote a case about his company. I subsequently brought him to Harvard, where he presented to a group of about 60 chief information officers or other senior information technology executives at the Harvard Business School in an executive program. This was a great audience for his company because at the time, his company was doing primarily software testing. And so very interestingly, he's the only person I've ever seen at the Harvard Business School in an exec program who got a standing ovation from all of the participants. And I have I've taught a lot of exec ed, but that began a series of publications, cases, companies like SAP, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Hartshafter Marks. We just completed one late last year on Microsoft's employment program. And we also, with Gary Pisano, did an article based on these cases in the Harvard Business Review in 2017, an article called Neurodiversity as a Competitive Advantage. So we saw very early in our research, it was very clear that there were human benefits involved in this. This is from an email to Torkel Sona very early on. Came to him completely from someone he did not know. "You don't know me. I'm crying as I write this. You recently hired my son, and he is happy again for the first time since he started school." Torkel's company ran into some complexities early on in that their biggest and first client was acquired by a private equity firm, and they required a 30% price reduction. This is a practice of private equity firms. And so they tried to get Torkel to lower the price for his firm's services. And he ultimately refused to do it. He said that the people that I have hired are not discount workers, they are premium price workers. They deserve to be paid well. And that was an important decision. He lost the business to offshore testers in India, but a happy ending. The business came back weeks later because his client came back saying, "Your testers are much, much better than what we were getting offshore." So in the end, they prevailed despite that difficult decision. This company, Specialist Learner, trained most of the companies that were early pioneers. These 6 companies they're referred to as the original roundtable members. All of them but Ford relied on Specialist Learner for early training, and the training was about how to assess capabilities for employees they wanted to hire without using biased approaches like interviewing. The roundtable has grown. You can see this is a larger number of companies. And this is a list of companies that have expressed interest in starting programs. There are many of them, and many of them are large. So this really is, I think, a movement. And this, by the way, this list is somewhat out of date because it came from the 2019 Autism at Work Summit at Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington. There was no 2020 summit because there was a pandemic. So it was canceled. It was planned for LinkedIn at Mountain View. So this list is probably out of date. There's probably many more now. In fact, we know that it is. Some of the benefits that people have recorded, some of them are things that you would expect, that they have been able to fill jobs in areas of skill shortage where they would not have been able to fill those positions. Some of them are a little less obvious. So they've been able to access, they believe, higher levels of talent than they would have otherwise accessed. They did expect marketing benefits. Companies who establish programs like this look like good public citizens. And so they do get some PR benefits and some marketing benefits. But one of the things that they didn't anticipate so much is that these programs have created a lot of employee engagement and favorable morale impacts. So, one of the implications, one of the things that's well documented about them is that they want their work to be more than just a paycheck. They want it to be meaningful. And one of the things that we have found in our research repeatedly across many companies is that having an autism employment program or a neurodiversity employment program has big benefits in terms of all the employees thinking that the company is doing a good thing, and that it's having favorable impacts on the quality of work and the quality of life, employment life, and so forth. Another benefit that I think people anticipated, but they didn't anticipate the full magnitude of it, was there was this idea that companies that innovate need to hire people with diverse backgrounds and diverse experience generally, because they need diverse perspectives, because that fuels innovation. And so there was this idea in establishing many of these programs that they were going to be accessing outliers, as they said it, potentially valuable ideas and points of view by bringing in people who had different ways of thinking. And of course, this applies beyond just neurodiversity. But one of the things that they discovered is it wasn't just the source of some of the benefits was not just the different ways of thinking. It was also the fact that especially many of the employees on the autism spectrum were more candid about problems that they saw. So where many employees, especially when they were first starting, would be very worried about the issue of pointing out problems in their new employer, some people on the spectrum were not similarly worried, and therefore they've been a source of spotting irregularities, inefficiencies, and they've been willing and courageous enough to call them out, and that's something we've seen in multiple companies as well. One of the things that's really intriguing in our research is that it's what we call spillover benefits. Is that when you make changes to accommodate neurodiverse employees, that many of the changes you make turn out to be good for everyone, right? So many of these benefits, they start narrow and then they get rolled out across the company because, as it turns out, trying to figure out what sorts of conditions you can put people in to make them most capable of adding value and doing good work, that's just a good way to think about all of your employees. And so many of the companies that we've talked to, we consistently hear people say, creating this program has made me better managers, which made us better managers of all of our employees. I would say, having followed this movement for really the last, since 2006, so that would be about 15 years. Some of the big wins are things like, the recruiting and selection processes. These started with specialist learner, but they emphasize various kinds of tryouts as opposed to heavy reliance on interviews, or that adapt interview approaches to make them more neurodiverse friendly. Another thing that's been a big success, I think, is design and operation of support networks for program employees, both within the company and some of which is provided by partner organizations. And then also there's been a lot of good work in establishing processes for placing program employees in good roles in managing their career progression. So, once they figured out how to hire employees that were very capable, but had reasons historically, there were biases against them historically in the hiring process. Once they got past those biases, then they had to work on the next problem, which is what do they do throughout their careers? There have to be career paths for these employees for it to be fulfilling for them. And also just generally, I think there's been a lot of success in integrating program participants into organizational contexts and normalizing their involvement in the life of the organization. And many of the companies that we talk to talk about moving towards what they call mainstreaming, which means they don't want to need in the long run a parallel program and a parallel approach. They want to adapt all of their approaches so that they can accommodate people who are on the autism spectrum and have other neurodiverse conditions. There are still some things that are kind of big challenges. One of them has to do with how companies find employees from this pool. Now, you wouldn't think this would be a problem. Torkel Sona, in one of my conversations with him fairly recently, he said, I never thought we would have a supply problem. He said, I thought we would need to work to create demand for people on the autism spectrum in companies. But what we actually have now is a supply problem. We have lots of companies that want to hire people, but we don't yet have good systems for matching up people who want employment with people who are looking to hire people. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. Another area where there's some difficulty is often these programs require partnerships with social organizations, either government agencies or nonprofits. And not surprisingly, those organizations have a very local orientation. The reason being that these kind of employment issues and funding and legislation and regulation, it tends to be quite local. But when these large companies attempt to move their neurodiversity employment programs to different geographies, one of the problems they encounter is that they have to start all over again in some geographies with the local partners. And even though that there are some local partners that cover large geographies, but even in those, they don't share information very much between the different geographies. So there is a challenge there. Lots of problems with variable support. And companies talk about needing to return to zero in the development of support networks when they move to a different place. The one that excites me is what I think is the huge remaining opportunity that has to do with broadening the impact. And, as much as I applaud the work that people have done in this area and the companies that have been willing to take the risks of beginning these programs, I would say I think it's undeniable that there are a lot more people who could be impacted by these programs. And if you look at the number of employees that are being hired by the likes of SAP and Microsoft and EY and so on, it's often in the hundreds. And when the CD says the incidence of autism in the population is 1 in 54, it's pretty clear we're just on the tip of the iceberg here, right? That we're not really going very deep. And so, I think the big gains are to be had if we can, and the way we usually put it is if we can dip deeper into the pool of neurodiverse talent, we're going to find many, many more people there who can work in particularly valuable ways. So, it's great work that's been done so far. The next frontier is how can we leverage this to get more orders of magnitude, more benefit. The good news is that there are companies that are doing this. And what I mean by this is they're developing systems that allow them to hire and keep very productive and often more productive than their previous employees were people who are on the autism spectrum. So this is an example you may know. This is a chain of car washes in Florida. Started by a family, young man who graduated from business school. His brother was on the autism spectrum and he wanted to start a business that would help his brother. And they have now grown considerably and are employing a number of people. And you can see all of the other stuff on this picture, color coding and graphs and checklists and so forth. Those are all the kinds of systems that they've created to help all of this work. And it's, I think it's quite innovative work. Another company that has done this that we've actually written a case on, Hartschaft and Marks, they've done similar work around creating systems. You can see one of the jobs that they've created for someone on the autism spectrum is it's not data science, it's not software development, it's about making boxes. And this company makes men's suits and sports coats. Those have to travel to retailers in cardboard boxes that are well constructed. And the gentleman that they hired to make boxes is extremely good at making boxes. He's much more productive than the previous employees in that role. In fact, so much so that the union got upset with him because he was too productive. So let's see, and then we've got Spectrum Designs in White Plains, New York. This company started with t-shirts, but they're now doing that, and they're also a bakery. And again, you can see lots of special, lots of arrangements that help with work processes. And one of the things that we're finding in this area as well is that when we create these systems, we do create benefits that allow companies to improve their performance generally. So this is not, I mean, this is a win-win for companies. I think most of them would say that. Another thing that we are starting to see in the research is this idea formalized that this is from a paper by Lars Bo Jepsen of Copenhagen Business School and Karim Lakhani of Harvard Business School. They were studying crowdsourcing, not neurodiversity employment. But what they've found is that technical and social marginality is a source of different perspectives and heuristics, and it does help create additional value, especially innovation. You can see on this graph out to the right, the lines cross, and the green line is higher than the orange line, which means non-traditional participants are actually more likely to create very valuable ideas. So there's actually kind of a research basis for some of this now. This is a bit of lore within the company SAP. It's what they call their puzzle analogy. It's something they've come around to as a result of their neurodiversity employment program. They like to say people are like jigsaw puzzle pieces. We're all differently shaped. And what companies have historically done is ask people to cut themselves into uniform shapes, to leave the irregular parts of themselves at home. And because frankly, it's easier to put rectangles together. They fit together better. Well, what SAP has started to realize is that it makes sense to do the hard work of fitting differently shaped puzzle pieces together. And that that they now want people to bring their whole selves to work, and they have a saying. They say it's the parts of ourselves that we don't all share that are the most likely source of innovations for the future. So I think really, really good progress. Torkel and I wrote a paper in MIT Sloan Management Review where we commented on kind of the general movement that this is launching. And I think it's much bigger than just neurodiversity employment. The phrase human resources suggests that there's valuable human stuff that companies just happen to keep stored in containers called people. This is kind of like referring to the contents of a famous art museum as paint resources. And so, what we're basically arguing for is to consider in management contexts people as individuals and to appreciate their particular strengths and abilities to offer and create value. That's pretty much it. I'm going to stop my sharing. I hope I blasted through that in a reasonable amount of time, Pam. So I'm going to
excellent job.
stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's be efficient. Efficient, that was the word I was looking for earlier.
There you go.
And Valeria, why don't you talk, and then we'll have some question and answer after your presentation.
I'm afraid I'll have some trouble with my PowerPoint. Can I have half a minute to find it? Sorry.
Sure.
Just half a minute.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question right now, Rob.
Okay.
First of all, I wanted to comment, I'm very interested in that puzzle metaphor, because usually when I see puzzles in relation to autism, I'm like, no, don't, because it feeds into that autism speaks, autistic people are mysteries, right? But I kind of like the way that the puzzle has been reformed as like, well, no, people are all shaped differently. It's just a nice reframing. But I'd also like to know more about how autistic people have been not just the subject of sort of job placement, but how have they actually collaborated with you in the research and also in the practical aspects of what you've been doing?
Well, so there are a number of ways that we don't actually have an autistic person on our research team currently. We have difficulties hiring as well, but we have worked a lot in conjunction with various researchers who are on the spectrum. Also, we have in our research, we've interviewed a lot of people who are in these programs as well. And it's there is an interesting there's an interesting question about how do we get these programs to evolve in ways that maximize value to everybody, right? And so there are, one of the things that we have a grant to study in this research is what seems to work best. And one of the things that's interesting is that there is variety in how these programs are structured. And not all of the variety is, I think it doesn't all equally work well, which is, the whole reason we would study it, right? So I do think there's a lot more work to be done there. It's a little bit, honestly, from a methodological standpoint, it's tricky for us because we depend on companies' cooperation to access our data. And companies have to be somewhat brave, I think, to let us interview their participants without any expectation that they will hear anything from those interviews. But that is our requirement, right? We cannot interview people and then report back to management, right? So it's a somewhat difficult thing to study, but I think we are making some progress.
All right, thank you. I think Valeria's ready now.
Yeah.
All right.
I just missed my where to click, but that's fine. So I am Valeria Aidos. I am an anthropologist in my profession and in my life. I am a white Brazilian woman of 48 years old with long curly light brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing glasses, not anymore, sorry, uh, and a green blouse. Now I am for more than a year in my house in the hot summer of a pandemic Brazil in my daughter's room where the internet is better. I'd like to welcome you all, and it's an honor to be here with Professor Robert, from whom I've already learned a lot. And I really thank to Professor Pamela Block and Marivete Gesser for the invitation. Today I'll talk about the findings of my PhD thesis. I worked on the inclusion of people with autism in the labor market in Brazil through the affirmative action of quotas for people with disabilities. I'm going to tell you a story. Anthropologists love stories that make we think. I believe I do not have to say that we are in a neurodiverse, secure place. So please listen to this story in the way your corporalities, sensorialities, and different ways of learning feel better. Interact if you want to and when you feel like. Do not let any social label, academic label, or other neurotypical barriers block your way of being here. So it's important for me to say these words. So let's start here. Share screen. All right. Okay, so that's the title of my research. Yeah, and I'm from URGS. On the bottom of this slide, you see our group of studies in anthropology and disability, the Brazilian Association of Anthropology, and the Brazilian Association for the Rights of Autistic People. So I belong to these three institutions today. So in the late, why it's not going down? Here we go. Oh gosh, I knew that. Sorry, I couldn't manage the slides. I think, Pamela, could you just let them go? you listen to me? Because I cannot see anything anymore, but I can talk. Help me, Lulu.
I'm going to share my screen so that we'll have the slides from my computer.
Eu desconfigurei tudo. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. So next one then. In the late 90s, the south of Brazil local government implemented a pilot project of empowering people with disabilities to promote the inclusion of this population into the workplace through a national affirmative law of 1991. This policy requires private companies with more than 100 employees to have from 2 to 5 of people with disabilities in their workforce. Since then, people with disability movements and activists fought for implementation of this law, which happened only in the late 2000. With a more effective governmental overseeing of private companies implemented by the Brazilian Labour Party through the governmental act called Living Without Limits. In 2013, I started a 4-year ethnography on the experiences of one person diagnosed with autism called Tomás, who was a user of this policy. Through this ethnography, I believe it's possible to reflect on the effects of inclusion policies in the management practices and on the subjectification processes of people with autism, as well as shed light on the agency opportunities of those people across the biopolitization of life and the symbolic and practical construction of citizenship, social inclusion, and social sensibilities in Brazil. Difficult words, we can go back to them in the end. So let me first contextualize my talk. It's important to say Tomás is a Brazilian young man from a lower class who's diagnosed with autism and intellectual disability. And as such, he has his particularities. When we meet a person with disability, when we meet an autistic person, we are meeting one autistic person. Everybody's different, so they are. In anthropology, we study authority relations in act. Yeah, people diversity in practice. So we will have a conversation about how Tomás' way of being autistic is materialized in daily relations, or how Tomás' way of being autistic produces social relations and meanings about autism. And what are the consequences of understanding Tomás and dealing with him in one way or another? Third, of course, this anthropological focus on the particularities does not make the general disappear. Next one, Pam, please. Or makes it less important. There is an autism spectrum, the one before, sorry. There is an autism spectrum with some people in and others out. Otherwise, it would not be a social marker of difference. But it is a very large spectrum. Some people are identified in some parts of the spectrum, but are not in the others. Fourth, sorry if I'm disappointing you, but I'm not going to talk about autism or neurodiversity. What it's like to be autistic, what it's better for them, autistic people do it. Okay, doctors do it, also do it in a their way of seeing people and minds. Fifth, I have an anthropological perspective in a dialogue with creep theory and feminist disability studies. These are areas that understand disability in a practical and theoretical basis of human rights. As such, I also focus the analysis on the relations between the impairment and the social barriers that block full people's participation in social life. For me, it's kind of obvious not to stigmatize people, to be anti-ableist, and to combat and problematize any idea that prevents any kind of people to be seen as ordinary people. In doing so, it happens that some of the, let's say, complicated perspectives I do not really like much are both the biomedical and the technocentric one. The biomedical because it sees people's abilities in general through the eye of evolutionistic scale for the ideal, the perfection, and the technocentric because of the same reason. They insist to put people in boxes, to scale them, to diminish some, and to exalt the others. They insist to produce people, to exotize people. They create meritocratic cases of success, which are violent not only for the case, but for everybody to struggle to reach it. I'm not being so hard here. I do like Viviana Zelizer's point of view that do not separate bad people and good people, economics and social, and so on. I think my contribution of being 4 years inside companies, following one person, and uh, being able to see the day by day of these inclusion processes has a different contribution. So what I going to tell you now is Thomas' story, and it talks about three very important things that I think I can contribute to this discussion. One, in Occidental way of thinking, management, and policy, we have a citizenship concept and a management point of view that focus on the individual. And I think the cases we see how to make them better to work and etc. But it's an individual. My thesis and the anthropological view from this perspective shows that without a big, huge network of care, family, accessibility, and so on, but outside companies, outside the schools, that these policies and these processes would very hardly work. People have to get there, yeah. And so there's all this macro way of thinking it. Second, we do have to positivate the word interdependence. Yeah, so all these meritocratic values, creative and achieving, producing, they have pros and cons, but much more than that, they produce people, and they produce citizenship, they produce our country. Yeah. So the picture I show illustrate in this slide is the first part of my talk. So it's talking about childhood, family, and school. All right. At the age of 20, Thomas is a frail young man with dark blonde hair. He lives with his parents and his younger brother in a small house in a poor neighborhood in the city of Porto Alegre. His mom, Joanna, works two jobs as a cleaner in various homes and as a clerk at the local bakery in order to provide for her family. Tomás' dad, Pedro, used to work as a security guard at a nearby gas station, but after being diagnosed with depression, he quit his job and now he's a full-time father, spending his days taking care of Juan, the youngest of the two sons who is also autistic but has more demand for human support in daily life. According to Joanna, no one noticed anything different with Tomás when he was little. It was only after he started school she could see a few differences between him and his peers, especially after he failed in school 4 times. One day, Thomas told me the teacher used to shout at him, "Okay, I'm going to explain again, just for Thomas." After he started to attend special schools, which are just for people with disability in Brazil, but even in those, he struggled to socialize with his peers and teachers. As he grew older, such difficulties became more apparent at the point that he did not want to go to school anymore, since, as his mom states, a boy like him loses his friends when the teenage years start. Thomas sees himself as a person with these difficulties, what makes it harder for him to learn and to participate in some activities. Neither he or his mother recognized the diagnosis of autism, which was only given when she sought psychological counseling for both her children at a private clinic as courtesy of one of her employers who was a psychiatrist. There, after 7 assessments, Thomas was diagnosed under the International Disease Classification ICD-10, F42, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, F84.9, Pervasive Development Disorder, unspecified, a common formal diagnosis for people in autism spectrum in Brazil. Having this document with the medical ICD was considered a disability was legally necessary for Thomas to apply for the working program. From the ages from 18 when he left school to 20, when he joined the apprentice program for companies, he would spend his day at home doing nothing, his mom tells me, even though he had always contributed to the family's income through his monthly government benefit. His dream was to work, according to his mother, and that was she was ready to do whatever she wants for. Next, Pam, please. So, next slide, please, Pam. Thank you. Oh, sorry, no lettering, but the picture is there. I was during the empowering course. Uh, it was during the empowering course for people with disabilities that I first met Thomas. The lesson was how to search for things on the internet, and he was walked through the classroom. I was walking through the classroom, and I saw him looking at fishes and birds all the time. After a long and detailed explanation on the species, their ideal environment, and other interesting information on fishes and birds, it was obvious that Thomas had a great knowledge about animals. That curiosity of mine was answered by the psychologist, who told me, of course, it's his special interests. He's autistic. Thomas was very committed to the course, and despite his difficulties, he required talking or communication. He was chosen to be the employee of the month by the teachers more than once. When exposed in front of the classroom, Thomas was often nervous and confused. Those moments, however, were seen by the specialist as a good practice for the work environment that he was able to face. As I was told by the psychopedagogical worker, in business, we should work the different competencies of people with disabilities in different ways. Instead of developing their weaker aspects, we should focus on their strengths. To her, the autistic person can practice social skills, but will always have a deficit in that area when compared to other people. That should be taken into consideration as a possible need of reasonable accommodation. Next one, please. Once the course was finished, Thomas went on to his practical internship at a big local company that works with sales and services. The morning shifts start at 8:30, so Thomas had to leave his house more than 1 hour earlier in order not to be late, which, according to his mother, he could do by himself only after he memorized the route and got to know very well the bus driver. The job assigned to him was to tag and numerically order the sales receipts, which he did perfectly through his internship. He would take the tag, check the number, search for its match and at a spreadsheet and place it in the correct order. Then he would take another one and do the same thing and on the whole 4 hours of his morning shift. Mr. Luis, an old and experienced worker in the company, was responsible for teaching Thomas when he got first there. According to the manager, the choice was made because Mr. Luis is a patient and affectionate people who would be a good backup for young apprentices. Mr. Luis said that people from management had told me to keep an eye on Thomas and give him the easy tasks. He then chose to ask him to do the ordering of taking the receipts. And according to him, this young man was focused, responsible, and learned the assignments very fast. The only problem, says Mr. Luis, is that every time he finishes a set of labels, he remains quiet at his desk until someone comes and gives him more work to do. It is difficult for his co-workers to accept this since they are always busy and cannot keep track of Thomas in doing it all the time. Even though he was good at his task and he was considered a fast learner, he never moved on to doing something different, a situation that made him uncomfortable not being able to learn new things. Mauricio, the stock manager, once told me that he thought about placing him in the mailing sector or changing things a bit to see if he liked the new position better. But that once Thomas saw how tall the shelves were, and he was petrified. It was considered a danger for him and his co-workers, since there were forklifts that drove around the area constantly and prevented him from changing sectors. It took Thomas over a month to use the bathroom in the middle of his shift. He just could not work up the courage to cross the room in order to get to the toilet. In the first months, he would not eat the snack his mother prepared for him until someone asked him if he was hungry or not and told him he could have a break. He had lunch at the company's cafeteria, which was something he claimed to like because he could eat for free. But despite enjoying it, he sat by himself at the same lunch table every day as his colleagues observed him from distance. That caused some discomfort to his coworkers, who even mentioned it to me that he would uh, that why what was it happening, and I said, well, why don't you invite him? And then the psychopedagogue, this professional who was supervising him, went there and had to interview and said, well, it's the company's duty to include Thomas in all the spaces and situations inside the workplace. During the 6 months I observed Thomas' routine in the company, his personal relationships with his co-worker were a recurrent topic in our conversations. He would always gladly emphasize how someone different said hello to him that day. One of his friends even helped him create an account in the social network Facebook, and he was thrilled that his colleagues accepted his friendship. And just as he was proud of making friends, he seemed bothered by the fact that Kelly, the human resource manager, never said hello to him, to the point of asking me one day if I didn't think she was prejudiced toward people with difficulties. People with difficulties is the expression used by Thomas and his mother to refer to his specificity, the difficulty in learning, the reason why he is entitled to the benefit, and why he was allowed to participate in the program. None of them recognized Thomas as autistic. Thomas' co-workers were never told what his disability was. That's a management topic, very important. They were only informed that he had been hired through the affirmative action. As they were used to working with people with physical, visible disabilities, they seemed puzzled by Thomas' diagnosis, what Thomas' diagnosis was. The fact that Thomas' co-workers mostly concerned about the type of disability made me reflect on how private companies manage diversity in their work environment. Since the company did not inform the employees what Thomas' specificity was, how could they deal with it in a way that he was not harmful for him? When asked, one of Thomas' co-workers said, said his job performance was fine, but he had a problem connecting with people. According to the man, he was a problem. It was a problem because made permanent company one to be permanent in the company, you have to be a team player. In Portuguese, you have to vestir a camiseta. Yeah. Even Edson, the boy from apprentice course who entered the company at the same time as Thomas, was making friends with a man at the storage section, which made Thomas' situation much more unique. But even against the colleagues' expectations, Thomas' goal was to be made permanent. And in order to do so, he put a lot of effort in following the rules with precision. He arrived exactly 30 minutes before every day and did not miss a day of work in 6 months. He did not seem to have ideal profile to the work in the company, but he was doing everything he could to. It is a common strategy for companies in Brazil to hire the apprentices with disability because the law allows them to hire trainees up 2 years before formally hiring them, which exempts them from specific governmental taxes while fulfill requirements imposed by the quotas legislation. During the time I observed Tomai's routine inside the company, I was also able to witness several phone calls from administrators that were frustrated with the fact that people with disabilities could not be fired or not showing for not showing at work or not doing a good job, or for discontent with their low productive. It was, I suspect, very unlikely that Thomas was going to be permanent, uh, uh, despite his willingness and commitment. At the end of 6 months internship, Thomas and his mother were called by the office to be told that yes, he was hired. But it was a shock and disappointment when Kelly, the management, told him he would only be hired part-time. The reason was that the company could not afford to have a person designated specifically to check on him for such a long period of time. We do not have enough people to take care of him, said the manager. He can work here only from 8 to noon, when Mr. Luis is in the same room, and then he can help with his duties. Joanna, the mother, was very upset with the remark and spoke loudly and clearly. But he can do things by himself. You ask him and you see. Thomas watched the whole thing in silence, sitting next to his mom. One, one could tell by his expression that he was worried that he might not be hired because of her and the wage reduction. The strategy of hiring apprentices and people with disabilities part-time is a frequent management technique because it allows the company to have two people with disabilities working 4 hours each and their play role instead of working 8 hours, spending only one quota in it. For Thomas' family, however, it meant his wages would be half of the amount he used to receive from government benefit. Uh, and a family with two minimum salaries would have to give up a half minimum salary if Thomas wanted to be hired. His mother, in the end, said, okay, it's his dream to work, so it's going to. Um, well, that's Thomas' story. I think we can talk a lot about it. I wanted to emphasize that, of course, it's a case, but it shows what cases of success don't show. Yeah, so some analytical important things are the citizenship and management concepts and ideas we have. These neoliberal ideologies that focus so much on the individual and the self-improvement of individual that I think even Rob's cases show the opposite. Companies working on the barriers, yes. So it was in 2013. So I think we could join these ideas, but always think broader, think larger. Yeah, all these care relations are very central to the success of the cases, and they are not showed or not talked about. We don't talk about it. Yeah. Um, it's a case of success. Thomas is employed up to now. uh, and well, I have many analytical thoughts. Maybe you could only show the last slide, Pamela, just to remember which ones we could. So what success stories do not show? The danger and the centrality of diagnosis and the desubjectivation of people if we do not really think about what autism is, that autistic people are people first, that they do not all of them have such characteristics that in Brazil we say we are not hiring a disability, we are hiring a person. Yeah. So the labor market here asks us, what kind of disability do I hire for such activity? And I say, wow, someone who likes it. Yeah. So also in the therapies, is horse hiding good for autism? Autistic people, and then we say horse hiding is good for people who likes horses. So all these tips that I've been learning these last 8 years with autistic people, activists, they are central to get more critical, more to problematize more, to deeper more the day by day knowledge we have of this, all this management and all this big scene, yeah, this macro scenario that we do have here in Brazil too, with many new market companies, many of them, and now autistic ones, yeah, and I'm using autistic and not people with autism. We can talk about it. Autistic people with startups of human resources in Brazil are the last boom of the moment, let's say something like that. I think we have to think about the negative character attributed to care relations or supported work. We see companies' effort to make people work alone. Is it? Is it what we think about human resources, about human relations in the labor? I loved that we bring the people all together, Rob, inside the company. That's it. Yeah. So let's work these relations together too. Yeah. So let's put the relations on focus, not the person that has to produce more. Do they want to produce? Of course. We are in a capitalist world. They do want to produce. They want to be seen as workers. They want to be seen as producers. It's very strong. But we can do the opposite too. You don't have to produce. You have to produce what you like, what you want, and the company has to deal with it. I don't know, just a little bit pointy. Uh, the non-awareness that the almost lack of cultural accessibility in companies we have, at least in Brazil, the lackness of knowing what autism is. It's we do have the stereotype of the autistic person that at any time could have a shutdown, and that dangerous. It seems like dangerous. So make people worried, make managers worried. So we do have to know about autism from autistic people. They do have to say like what they are, if they are, the way they are, etc. And the social economic unsustainability of this policy. So we are here. I'm here talking from a lower class part of the population. Yeah. So maybe it's not the case of many neurodiverse people that are in these big companies. And these policies and management are still focused on the individual. That's what I've been talking all my talk. I hope I could. I'm sorry about the technical problems, and thank you very much. So are the topics I'd like to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are past the hour, so if people need to leave, they can, but we can continue with discussions as well. If people are have questions for our speakers, we can, you can, we have claps in the chat. You can send the questions to me via the chat and I can share them with the speakers if you have questions. Does anyone have any questions? Do you have questions for each other? Do you have a question for Rob, Valeria? Rob, do you have a question for Valeria?
I think one question you've already made before, Pamela. So how autistic people are working together with these companies? Yeah, if they are thinking the projects, if they are participating in all the steps of these new techniques and things like that. This is one curiosity I have, and I think it's very central. And of course, I would like to talk a little bit Brazil, but I think we won't have time. But we do have very similar scenario, very similar since the quotas policy started, and since 2013, the autism started to be legally recognized as disability. So they started to get all the rights people with disability have. Yeah, so that's important.
Yeah, I would say that in a lot of the companies we've looked at, there's been a lot of progress in integrating. The other thing that struck me about when you talked about, sort of the difficulties that Thomas, I guess, right? Thomas, yeah, that he had with people viewing kind of his situation and the support that it required unfavorably. I think there's a fair amount of progress in the companies we've been seeing that, working on that issue. So almost all of the companies we've studied before an autistic person is placed into an organization, there's training for the supervisor and also for the coworkers, just so that people have an opportunity to understand a little bit more and have ask questions, just to sort of demystify and normalize. And I think, from what I have heard, there's been a lot of, the podcast that we did with Microsoft, we did interview some people who were in the program, and consistently they talk about how welcoming this has all been and how it's all been prepared for them before they arrive. So also the support arrangements are not unique to people in this program. At Microsoft, anyone can request accommodations, whether it's, an ergonomic chair or headphones because you have auditory stimulus issues or anything like that. So it's not, they're working at not stigmatizing the support requirements as well. So, and in fact, I think there's a belief that everybody has some support needs, right? Of some kind. So I think that's the way they're framing it.
Valeria, here's a question for you. Have you found that there tends to be a lot of resistance to affirmative action policies? Especially, I'm thinking along the lines of vestir a camiseta, if I heard correctly, to be a team player, which I'm guessing also distinguishes and marks these people as different, not an equal part of the team. I guess this gets at a question of equality versus equity.
Yeah, it is, but I think there is a specificity here when we talk about autism. Yeah, because you can do many things. You can be very productive, but there is all this label, this way of being that are it's not, people don't talk about. So you have to make friends. You have to get on well with everybody. You have to go to the happy hour after the work. We are talking about Brazil. I don't know in other parts of the world. Yeah, and when we think in a large picture, most of the people that are fired are because of personal relations, not exactly because of the job they are doing. So yes, to be less or more productive is a problem for managers, but they can deal with it. What is different is that all this background that Rob told that companies are doing and doing teaching and talking about autism before the people arrives always is a two sides thing. So it's a management. The resistance, economical resistance, yes, yeah. The people here, so many companies in Brazil, they prefer to pay the fees and not to hire people with disability. That's like that.
Yeah.
And that's why my talk is what the cases of success do not talk, because the majority, they don't do it. We have exceptions in Rob's talk. So just, it's important to point it, yeah? Because of course we do want social marketing. These big companies, they sell these successes. But in the day by day, okay, not only hiring or not, paying less, but in the day by day, we see that face, oh gosh, I have so many to do, I have to go there again. So it's not like the bad guy, the manager that doesn't want to spend money on these people. It's much more complicated, this resistance to the quotas.
It's the sitting alone in the cafeteria every day.
It is. It's also like that. Yeah. And it is inside us. We have it inside us that we do have to be an individual. I have to be do things by myself. And he feels it. His colleagues feel it. And the company doesn't like it. Because it's all this self-made man way of being that we are inside. The whole Occidental world wants to be that. We want to have merits. Yeah, so you see the resistance against the affirmative law, it is equality and equality.
Equity.
Equity. But what the anthropological contribution is, it is there in every look, every small detail of the day by day of everybody. Yeah, so all this negative feeling we have about interdependence, that's what disability studies bring to companies. You have to see it as positive. As Rob said, everybody depends on something. I need to have to wear shoes to go out. Of course, you cannot forget that some people have the right, yeah, of a specific support because they are people with disabilities. They are autistic. They have their specificities, but they are very, very different. So what anthropologists say all the time, ask them. That's the only step I think uh, everybody should always listen to. We go into a classroom, what everyone here needs as a support, everyone, any kind of support. Yeah, and when we talk about invisible disabilities, we are talking about the support, the accessibility, being a person. There are very nice techno ideas like, how about building a robot? And I said, all right, so the person doesn't have to chat with the colleague, that he can have the robot. Oh my God, what world are we living on? So these kind of things I think are the dialogue we can have. Yeah. So
Rob, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we close the meeting?
Well, there's a lot of intriguing things in what Valeria is saying, and the whole thing about companies wanting people to be team players is interesting because we have asked people about that, and I think it's undeniable that for a long time, human resource management guidelines suggested that you should walk into an interview with a checklist. And the checklist should have things on it like, are they a team? Do they seem like a team player? Do they look you in the eye? How, do they interact in a way that makes them seem like they would fit with our culture or with their team? And, a lot of those things, a lot of those checklists, clearly, I think from today's perspective, built in bias against people who were clearly capable of doing good work. And so I do think we are seeing some progress. I know one of the big accounting firms, one of the senior executives that I interviewed there, she said, we have stopped, and this isn't going to be an exact quote because I can't remember the quote exactly, but it was something like this. She said, we have stopped asking questions about whether an employee fits, and instead we ask whether they are additive to our culture. In other words, is there something that they bring that we need? And if so, they don't have to be a team player, right? So, if they are, fine. That's another thing, is that some of these companies are discovering that some of the stereotypes about social interaction are not at all true for all of the people that they hire. Microsoft has begun hiring people in retail sales position for their retail stores, and it's gone very well. Turns out that some people on the autism spectrum are actually quite interested in social interaction and very good at it. So maybe not the same, but very good at it. So it's it is interesting. I guess the other thing I would say is, concerning some of the difficulties, there have been in the places that we've studied, there have been difficulties that arise from social interactions and, difficulties in social interaction. There's one story that we heard about an autistic employee who was working for this company's client, and this person told the person who was working for the client, he said, you realize you're very bad at your job. You're not good at your job at all. And I think, it was an interesting situation because I think he wasn't saying anything that other people hadn't thought, but he was saying it out loud. And that required, I think, what most companies that we've studied would call coaching, right? Is that somebody had to step in that situation and smooth things over. But that situation was not unmanageable. It was possible to manage a situation like that. So that's, I think certainly there are lots of issues and difficulties and challenges still to be solved. But I do think, some of these companies, and, the other thing I would say about them is that the people who are involved in these programs, almost all of them tend to have a stake in this. So like Jenny Leigh Fleury, who is the chief accessibility officer for Microsoft, has a daughter who's on the autism spectrum. Jose Velasco, who's the lead for SAP, has 2 children, both adults on the autism spectrum. So I don't think, when we start to worry, I mean, sometimes people have raised issues about exploitation, but Jose Velasco is not exploiting people on the autism spectrum. He has 2 children of his own on the autism spectrum. Same with Jenny Leigh Fleury. So I think we have to be careful and be vigilant and keep working at this, but I think there is some progress being made. It's really just the tip of the iceberg right now, but hopefully it can be expanded.
Can I say 3 things, Pam? Sorry, I know we are running out of time, but it's 3 phrases, 3 sentences.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I gotta pick up my son.
one of them is people. What are social relations? What are social interaction? We have our typical social interaction and one concept about what is a good social interaction or not. Thomas had a very good social interaction in his way of interact. So we are still expecting the way typical people interact. They have another way of interaction, and they are very good in their way of interaction. So this is one very important point, that these concepts, these ideas, we have to move. Yeah. The second one was all these misunderstandings that are very common in the day by day of autistic people, that they do verbalize more. Yeah. The labels, what we don't say. Yes. Our metaphors, not metaphors, but entre linhas, between the lines. So I've been I've been every day talking with many autistic people in the WhatsApp now, because we are in a pandemic. And they have very, very, very interesting strategies to show us that our way of communicating is very poor, because they are able to verbalize everything and we can't. These typical people don't know how to communicate. I'm sorry. I am clear on what I say, and you don't. And then you fight with your colleague because you didn't say. So let's move the position we are looking from it, from everything. Let's look from, I am, my perspective, my position as an anthropologist is to work with, to plan with, to write with. I write with my interlocutors. My research project was written collaboratively, because the important questions, I know the ones I am curious about, but they have their questions. So that's the second point. The third one is, we have an issue now, because, and of course it's not on purpose, but yes, autistic people are seen as lonely people. So let's put them in the jobs that they can work with machines. Of course, Microsoft and all these big companies have such a good experiences about it. But I have an autistic student who says, who wants to teach history. He likes history. The other one likes painting, and the other one likes the mathematics or whatever. They don't have a job. Yeah, they cannot. Thomas could be a great biologist. He could be working in an aquarium. Why do they put him to labeling things? Of course, he's very happy. He's really happy. It changed his life. It changed his mother's life. It changed the company's life, Rob. And it's dangerous too, because when we put a Down syndrome person, everybody is now affected, and his affection changed the culture, the organization culture. We are much more good people now. That's dangerous. Yeah, the autistic person is put in a room. Oh, and now everybody is trying to bring to reason, to bring to mind things that everybody knew, but nobody said. It changed me like a person. Of course it does. But is it such a high? Uh, is it such a strong goal for one person to do? Can you all see we are putting on a person the all these possibilities of changing many things, yeah, possibilities of making that company inclusive, possibilities of changing people's lives, learning from them. It is very hard. Some people can do it, but most people can't. They cannot afford the day by day of these duties. So Rita, one of the president of Abraça, told me, Valeria, go there and do the white woman typical job for me, please, because I wouldn't be able to listen to so many things and be there. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing here, the white typical job. So more or less like this.
Thank you. I'm sorry, everyone. I have got to close the presentation now. I do hope that Rob and Valeria continue the discussion. And if you want to provide any feedback, audience members, you can send to me or to Marivechi. We can send questions to Rob and Valeria for you. There is a way to, continue having dialogues, people who are passionate about these issues. So thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to the transcribers and the captioner and the interpreters who stayed well past when they were supposed to stay. I'm grateful for you all for sharing this part of the day with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Pam and Valeria. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.